This is how I make these bellied slab mugs. They have a nice geometrical shape and make a good hearty mug. The first thing that I do is I roll a clay slab. If you've seen some of my other videos, you'll know that I've covered tips on rolling clay before. So rather than going over it all again, I'll link here to a video on how to roll a clay slab, so that if you're starting out, you can pick up some tips there. I usually use 3mm roller guides when I'm making mugs. Roller guides are the wooden sticks on either side of the clay slab. They help you roll an even slab that's of a particular thickness throughout. I find that a 3mm clay slab is thick enough to be easy for hand building, but it's thin enough so that your mugs won't be too heavy. I roll the clay and then I run a rib over it to get rid of any texture left behind by the fabric I'm rolling on. I make these mugs using a template. Once the slab is ready, I put the main part of the template in place. I cut around the template with my clay knife. This big part of the template makes the large clay cone that forms the top portion of the mug. When I'm cutting along the template, I use my left hand to support the clay knife so that I follow along the line of the template accurately. I keep large offcuts of clay and use them for other parts of the mug, such as cutting out the base, but any small offcuts can be wedged and reused. If you like the look of the mugs and you'd like to make one yourself, you can get a copy of the template in my online store. I'll put a link to the template in the description below. At the moment, the clay here is too soft to pick up and shape, so I transfer it onto a wooden wearboard to let it firm up for a while. In the meantime, I'm going to cut out the second part of the mug. This is the lower section of the mug, and it's made up from another piece of the template that has a rainbow shape. I cut around this section too, and once again, this clay needs to be put to one side to firm up. Because this is a thin strip of clay, it would be a bad idea to pick it up and transfer it onto the wooden board. It would lose its shape, and then it wouldn't fit together well with the other half of the mug. So I slide a flexible chopping board underneath it and lift the whole thing up to stop it from stretching. While that's firming up, I'm going to prepare the base of the mug. I use a banding wheel with a wooden pottery bat on top. I have an offcut of clay from earlier, which I put on some paper on the banding wheel. Then I use the base template to cut out a circle of clay that will fit on the bottom of the mug. I put my maker's mark on the bottom, and then I put the base to one side until I need it. Now that the wall of the mug is a bit firmer, I prepare it so that I can form it into a clay cone. It's worth noting that when I curve the clay around at the moment, the bottom edge of the clay doesn't sit flat against the worktop, but I'm going to be joining it to the lower half of the mug, and I want both edges to sit flat against each other. So I'm going to trim a bit of clay off the long edge and create a beveled edge. To do that, I hold my clay knife at a slight angle. I'm only taking off a small amount of clay, so I hold it at around a 75-degree angle. Now when I curve the clay into a cone, the bottom edge will sit flat against the other clay slab, which will create a better join. Next I smooth the shorter edge of the two long curves. This shorter edge is going to be the rim of the mug, and it's easier to smooth the rim when the clay is flat on the worktop, so I run a damp sponge and my fingertip along the edge a few times. Then I turn the clay over and smooth down the other side to give the rim a nice, soft, even curve. The next thing that I do is I bevel both of the shorter edges. When I curve the clay around into its cone shape, it's the two shorter edges that are going to join together. You can create a good smooth join if you bevel the edges. I use the same technique that I used earlier on, but with the short edges, I bevel them at about 45 degrees, as I want them to overlap. I bevel one edge and then I turn the clay over and bevel the other edge. It's important to turn the slab, otherwise you end up with two edges that don't overlap and you have to start again. I then score into the two short edges with my clay scoring tool to create a rough texture. I then lift the clay slab and curve it around. Once it's more or less in the right shape, I'll add some clay slip to both scored edges. Then I start to press the two edges together. I use my left hand to support the inside surface, and I press the join with my fingers on the outside. As I'm pressing together, my fingers on the inside are moving in the opposite direction to the fingers on the outside. This compresses the clay and helps to create an overlap. When the clay has been joined together, I wipe away the excess slip with my finger. Then I use my rubber rib to smooth the join down. I run the rib over the join a few times. This compresses the join and it fixes the clay together, and it creates a nice smooth surface on the outside of the mug too. I slice a little bit of clay off the top edge, where a small bump of clay is formed. Then I start to smooth the inside surface of the join with my wooden tool. You can get rid of any marks left behind by the wooden tool with a platter tool. That's the long green plastic tool that you can see. Once I've blended and smoothed the inside join at both ends, I place the wide end of the cone on an old plastic bowl. This will keep the bottom of the cone nice and circular when I put it to one side and let the join firm up. I also put an old plastic container in the narrower end to make sure that the rim of the mug stays circular too. Now that the top portion of the mug is done, it's time to make the bottom half. This bit of the mug is made from the thinner horseshoe-shaped piece of clay that I cut out earlier. The first thing that I do is I bevel both short ends of the slab, but then, like with the larger slab of clay, I'm going to slice away a little bit of clay along the longer curve of the slab. That's because when this slab of clay is curved around into the short cone, I want the wider top edge to be flat. As with the larger slab, I hold my clay knife at about a 75-degree angle and cut away a thin sliver of clay along the curved edge. I then score both narrow ends of the clay. I curve the clay around and apply some clay slip. I press the join together and blend the edges of the clay on the inside and the outside, as I did with the larger cone. The bottom section of the clay is now ready to be attached to the base of the mug, so I score around the edge of the base using my serrated rib tool, and I score along the bottom edge of the mug too. I apply slip to both scored surfaces. Then I lower the bottom section of the mug onto the base. Before the two scored edges stick together too firmly, you can wiggle the lower half of the mug around a bit to make sure that it's positioned right in the middle of the base. And then I just put a bit of gentle pressure on the top just to make sure that they're bonded together well. And then I'm just rolling out a small thin coil of clay, because what I want to do is put a small thin coil of clay onto the inside of the join. So I put a bit of slip on there, and then I'm just gently pressing the coil into place so that it's right over that join. This is just a way of reinforcing the join between the bottom of the mug and the base of the mug. So pressing it in, and then you can cut it to length. There's a little bit of extra coil there. That's what it should look like. And then using my wooden tool, I'm just going to press that into the joint gently. As you can see, I'm using my outside hand to support the outside of the mug so that you don't lose the shape. And then I've got a damp piece of chamois leather, which I'm just using just to smooth it out, just to get rid of any texture that has been left behind by the wooden tools. I then go around and trim off some of the excess clay on the base. I trim it so that there's about 1 millimetre extra left around the base. I deliberately make the base a little bit larger than the bottom of the mug to give me some margin for error, and also to give me some extra clay to blend onto the bottom of the mug. I use my wooden modelling tools to blend the base onto the outside edge of the bottom of the mug. Once the base is blended on, I turn the mug over and remove the piece of paper. Then I use the flat edge of a wooden tool to tidy up the outside bottom edge and make it flush. I run a rubber rib over the base too, to get rid of any marks left behind by the wooden tool. Finally, I go over the outside surface with my damp chamois leather to leave a nice smooth finish. The two pieces of the mug are now ready to be joined together. To make a good firm bond, I score into both wide edges of the mug with my serrated rib tool. Then I apply some slip to both scored edges. I lower the top part of the mug into position so that the two edges are lined up with one another. Before the mug is too stuck in position, you can move it around and move the two halves so that they're lined up properly with one another. Then once it's in position, I use the tips of my fingers to blend the outside of the mug. Attaching the top half of the mug to the bottom half of the mug is a bit of a process. I start off blending it with the tips of my fingers, then I use my wooden tool to blend the join on the inside of the mug too. I use my left hand to support the outside of the mug, and I smooth the join on the inside. It's important to go all the way around on the inside to make sure that the join is blended, and to prevent the join from opening up and cracking as the clay dries. This part of the process can take some patience. After I've gone around the whole of the inside join with the wooden tool, I use my damp chamois leather over the join to make a nice smooth surface on the inside of the mug. I then turn the mug over. You'll probably find that all that blending on the inside of the mug has made the outside of the mug a little untidy or uneven. So I go around the outside join with my rubber rib, tidying it up. You might also find that when you've applied pressure on the inside of the join on the outside might have opened up a little. I check to see if this has happened, and if it has, I just blend the outside seams together again with my finger or the rubber rib. Once I'm happy that the join is secure and looks good, I turn the mug the right way up. If you notice that there are some bulges in the clay, you can gently reshape the bottom of the mug with your fingertips on the inside to make an even cone shape. Just be sure to press gently so that you don't open the join up again. When I'm happy with the shape of the mug, I put my old plastic container back into the rim to keep it round, and I put the mug to one side to let the join set up properly whilst I make the handle. This mug is quite tall, so you can either make a long handle like this one, or you can make a shorter handle that attaches to the top portion of the mug like this one. I roll out a small portion of clay using my 5mm roller guides. I cut around the long rectangular template. Once I've cut the handle out, I use a damp sponge to smooth each edge of the handle. I curve the handle into the shape that I want it to be and leave it to one side to become leather hard. When the handle is firmed up, I trim it to length. I gauge the length by holding it in my hand, then I make a couple of small marks with my thumbnail where I want to trim the handle. I use my clay knife to cut the handle to length. Before I attach the handle, I also trim the end of the handle so that it's slightly concave. This will help it sit flush against the curve of the side of the mug. To attach the handle, I hold it in place against the side of the mug and I decide where I want it to be positioned. I make sure it's lined up straight and looks good. Then I make a few small marks with the tip of my clay knife on the mug all around the handle at both ends. Once I've made some marks on the mug, I remove the handle and then I score into the side of the mug at the point where the handle will join. I also score both ends of the handle too. I apply some clay slip to each of the scored surfaces. Then I put the handle in position and gently press it into place. It's a good idea to put one hand on the inside surface of the mug to support it as you press the handle on. To make sure the handle is firmly attached, I make a small coil of clay which I wrap around the end of the handle where it joins to the mug. I press the clay coil into the join and then I blend the clay coil onto the mug and the handle. I also add a clay coil to the bottom part of the handle too. The wooden modelling tool will have left some marks behind, so once the coil has been blended in, I wipe the point at which the handle joins with a piece of damp chamois leather to make a nice smooth surface. When the handle is attached, your mug is ready to be dried slowly, fired and then glazed. Here are some of the glazed mugs. As an alternative, I also make the same shaped mug and add a texture design on the top half. I'll briefly show you how I added this pattern to the mug. It's more or less the same process. The difference is that when I've prepared the big slab of clay that makes up the top half of the mug, I use a textured roller to add the design. This texture roller is by MKM Tools and it's the large size which fits well onto this particular mug design. I put the roller in position and applying a firm, even pressure, I follow the curve of the slab around with the roller. After I've added the texture, I put the template back in place. You can see that using the texture roller has stretched the clay a bit. It's important to trim the slab to length again, otherwise when you're trying to add the top half of the mug to the bottom half, they won't fit together. I trim the ends of the clay and then I bevel both ends so that they join together well. One of the reasons I like this size of texture roller is that it leaves a smooth strip of clay at the top and bottom of the slab. This is helpful with this particular mug because when you join the top and the bottom halves of the mug together, you need to blend the two. Having a strip of smooth clay without a texture on it makes the blending process easier. If the texture went all the way down to the bottom edge of the slab, it would be harder to attach the two slabs together and keep a nice neat join. As you can see, I'm able to blend with my fingers and the rubber rib without losing the textured pattern. I add the handle in the same way. The only difference is that when I'm adding the coil of clay around the handle and blending it in, as much as possible I try to avoid losing the texture on the clay. When you're blending the handle on, you will lose a little bit of texture, but it doesn't need to be too much. And once you've smoothed away the marks made by the modelling tool, you won't really notice any lost texture around the handle at all. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to get a copy of the template. These textured mugs look lovely with celadon glazes that pull in the recesses of the texture and highlight the pattern. Thanks for watching, bye!